Hey guys, welcome to Southern Gal True Crime. If it's your first time here, I'm so glad to have you here. I feature missing persons, cold cases, current true crime in the news, and more. I hope everybody has had a wonderful week. It's Sunday, so we're going to have a little chill time with true crime tonight. We're going to be taking a look at the 10 oldest cases that were ever solved. I found this article, I think it came from oldest.org. Um, and I got to reading it. It just blew my mind how many of these, I'm talking old cases, have been solved lately. But with the advancement of technology and DNA, a lot of these cases are getting solved or at least reopened to be reinvestigated. Most notably, lately, with Rex Human being arrested and charged with 3 of the killings in the Long Island serial killings, the Gilgo 4. He's been charged with 3 of them, suspected in the 4th one. So I just thought it'd be interesting to take a look at these top 10 crimes. But first, as always, I feature a missing person. There we go. And they come from neverforgotten.org, which is the Arkansas Missing Persons Database. And tonight's missing person is Alex Barroso. He is 16 years old. He is a white male, 5'8", 195 pounds, with brown hair or brown eyes and black hair. And he went missing on July 29th, so not that long ago, from Fort Smith, Arkansas. If you have any information about Alex or his disappearance, you can contact the Fort Smith Police Department at 479-709-5100. So I urge you, please like, share, comment on this video. It helps it get out to more people. I will put a link to this information in the description box so you can share this information anywhere and everywhere. The more people that see it, the better. That's the purpose of my channel, is to help bring attention to our missing and our cold cases, unsolved cold cases, to try to bring some closure to some of these families and hopefully bring missing home safely. All right. So we are going to move that, and we are going to get into our, oh my goodness, I always have technical difficulties. There we go. Still having technical difficulties. Oh my goodness. It's really late at night, so I'm really having difficulties here. There we go. All right. So we're going to take a look at the top 10 oldest solved cases. And as you see here, number 10, we all know this one, the BTK Killer, which is Dennis Rader. It took 31 years, 1 month, and 13 days to solve this case. He committed his crimes between January 15th, 1974 and January 19th, 1991. And he was convicted February 28th, 2005 of 10 murders. Sorry, killings. I'm not supposed to say murders. YouTube doesn't like that. And most of these killings took place in Wichita and Park City, Kansas. Now, let me get my trusty tablet fired up and give you a little bit more information. Although this was a high profile case, so we know most everything about this case. And this information, like I said, comes from oldest.org. And it says, in addition to the Golden State case, the BTK homicide stumped and fascinated investigators as well as Americans, of course, for several decades. Sorry, I'm having trouble getting everything situated. BTK's crimes began on January 15th, 1974, when four members of the Otero family were killed in Wichita, Kansas. Now, 6 more homicides were conducted in the area, and one in nearby Park City between April 4th, 74 and January 19th, 1991. After 1991, BTK, I can't use my words right tonight. BTK stopped and the case went cold. Then in 2004, a report in the Wichita Eagle, which speculated that all the years since the murders, killings stopped, suggested that the offender was either dead or in prison. Now, Mr. Rader, being the narcissist that most serial offenders are, was craving attention. So he sent a letter to the Eagle taking responsibility for an unsolved 1986 killing. And over the next year, he sent letters, puzzles, and other clues to media outlets, taunting the police to try and catch him because, like I said, the majority of serial offenders are narcissistic and crave the attention, so they'll do anything they can. They think they're the smartest person in the room, so they will take chances and do stuff like he did, thinking that they will never get caught. But he ended up getting caught. And that's another thing. Some people assume that these serial offenders are super intelligent, geniuses, high IQs. Most of them are ordinary people, not that bright a lot of times, and this is just my opinion. But their ego and being narcissists, like I said, they think they're the smartest person in the world. They're never going to get caught. But we all know that is not always the case, thankfully. So Rader's downfall came when he asked police, and every time I read this, I have to laugh because it's just so, even a lay person, normal person like me knows something like this. So his downfall came when he asked police if his writings could be traced on a floppy disk. So the police are like, okay. So the police answered his question in a newspaper ad, and Rader sent the floppy disk to a Fox TV affiliate in Wichita. So the police were able to trace the floppy disk back to Rader, but they needed stronger evidence to convict him. They used DNA taken from Rader's daughter to match against DNA taken from one of BTK's victims. So see, not so smart. Rader was then arrested on February 25th, 2005 and charged 3 days later with 10 counts of first degree. And on August 18th of that year, he was sentenced to 10 consecutive life sentences with a minimum of 175 years. So, Rader was not as smart as he thought he was. And a little piece of trivia, this is very disturbing, very scary. During his police interviews, he revealed that, quote, there are a lot of lucky people. And the police took that to mean that he had thought about and developed various levels of plans for other victims, but never carried them out. Like I said, I find that very scary, very disturbing. Who knows how long he would have continued with his activities if he hadn't got himself caught. So thank goodness he got himself caught. All right. Next on the list, number 9, we have the disappearance of Eton Potts, or Pats. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. This happened in Manhattan, New York. And it took 37 years, 10 months, and 24 days to be solved. The crime happened on May 25th, 1979, and a conviction was April 18th, 2017, and the offender was Pedro Hernandez. Now, Mr. Hernandez, sorry, trying to get down to my, okay, so the disappearance of Eton is another high-profile case, cold case, that went unsolved for decades. For years, Eton's disappearance gripped the nation, and he was one, I thought this was interesting, he was one of the first children to be profiled on the milk carton campaigns of the early 1980s. Now, anyone of a certain age remembers, I remember, and when they started putting the pictures of the missing children, missing people on the milk cartons. Sorry, let me grab a drink. Okay. So in 1985, Jose Antonio Ramos, who was a convicted child predator, he was a friend of Eton's former babysitters. He was identified as the primary suspect, but however, there was never enough evidence to convict him. Eton's case eventually went cold, but was reopened in 2010. However, no new evidence surfaced until Pedro Hernandez confessed in 2012. So this was one that wasn't solved with DNA, but with a confession, which is, in my opinion, I believe is better than DNA, because DNA sometimes can be tricky. So Hernandez was charged with second degree, but the initial trial was dismissed because Hernandez's lawyer argued that he had limited intelligence and a personality disorder that made it difficult for him to distinguish between reality and fantasy. So apparently they were going to go for the old not guilty by reason of insanity plea. So following a mistrial in 2015, Hernandez was eventually sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after serving at least 25 years in 2017. I don't know. I didn't really look into all these offenders, so I don't know if he was paroled, if he's still in prison. If anybody knows, has time to look it up, you can leave it in the comments. And I would love to hear all y'all's what y'all think about these cases that are being solved, that are so old. So be sure to leave a comment. Just always be respectful of each other, of the victims, and the victims' families. All right, another piece of trivia. Eton's disappearance helped launch the missing children movement. And in 1983, President Ronald Reagan designated May 25th, which was the anniversary of Eton's disappearance, as National Missing Children's Day in the United States. So I thought that was pretty neat. All right. Number 8 is the homicides of the Lyon sisters from Wheaton, Maryland. And this case took 42 years, 5 months, and 18 days to be solved. The date of the crime, March 25th, 1975, and the conviction date was September 12th, 2017. Catherine and Sheila Lyon were the sisters who were killed, and the suspect is Lloyd Welch. So we will learn about Mr. Welch. So on March 25th, 1975, Catherine and Sheila Line, aged 10 and 12, went missing while on a trip to a nearby mall. The sisters' disappearance sparked one of the largest police investigations in Washington metropolitan area history. There was a massive volunteer search effort, but the sisters were never found. There were a few suspects, and the eventual convicted offender, Lloyd Welch, during the investigation, Mr. Welch, once again being the narcissist and smartest person in the room, he made a report to the police saying that he had seen a suspicious man at the mall the day the sisters disappeared. Really. So, like I said, they think they're never going to get caught, but thankfully a lot of them do. So over the next few decades, the Line sisters case was reopened from time to time, but there were never really any leads until Sergeant Chris Homrock came across Welch's interview in 2013. And I'm assuming this is the interview where he made the report saying that he had seen a suspicious man the day that the sisters disappeared. Interviewers openly named Welch a person of interest in 2014, and a year later, Welch was indicted on first-degree felony for his alleged involvement in the killings of Catherine and Sheila. On September 12th, 2017, he pleaded guilty to 2 counts of first-degree homicide for the abduction and killing of Catherine and Sheila Line. So, another one bites the dust. Another one down. More trivia. Catherine and Sheila's father was a well-known radio personality at WMAL, and he later went to work as a victim counselor. And the sisters also had an older brother named Jay, who became a police officer. So after the girls' killings, the father went into victim counseling, and the brother became a police officer. So I would assume that the deaths of their sisters and daughter had a lot to do with that. All right, number 7. The homicides of 2 El Segundo police officers. From, of course, in El Segundo, California. It took 45 years, 8 months, and 2 days. Crime date of the crime, July 22nd, 1957. And conviction date was March 24th, 2003. And the convicted man was Gerald Mason. All right, let's take a look at this case. So the killings of officers Milton Curtis and Richard Phillips in 1957 kicked off a 45-year investigation that was not solved until 2003. 3 years after Curtis and Phillips were killed, the weapon was recovered a mile from the crime scene in a random backyard. So 3 years. So this weapon, and I'm assuming it was probably a firearm, was just thrown probably after the killings in this backyard, and it stayed there for 3 years without anybody noticing it. Of course, it could have been in, behind a shrub or in tall grass or whatever, but it was very fortunate, very lucky that it was found after 3 years. And it was also very fortunate. Now, this was 1957, so, gun violence may have not been as prevalent as it is now. But luckily, no children or any other person found the weapon, especially a child. So the serial number of the gun was traced to a purchase at a Sears in Shreveport, Louisiana, under the alias George D. Wilson. So as we know now, George D. Wilson was an alias for Gerald Mason, which is why the case went cold. The case was not reopened until 2002 when computerized fingerprinting technology was more advanced. So once again, a case of technology getting better and helping to solve this case. A match based on the partial left thumbprints lifted from the steering wheel of the stolen car came back about a man convicted of burglary in 1956, which led to Mason's arrest. So, and I don't know if, let's see, a match based on the steering wheel of a stolen car. So apparently before Mr. Mason decided to take the lives of police officers, he was into theft and stole a car, and luckily left his fingerprint. Okay, so Mason admitted to the killings, and he also admitted that he assaulted 4 teenagers and SA'd one of the girls before he was pulled over by Curtis and Phillips. So, shaken by what he had done, Mason took the lives of Curtis and Phillips so he could get away with his other crimes. Yeah, shaken by what he had done. I don't think that meant he felt guilty. He just didn't want to get caught and go to prison. So Mr. Mason died in prison in 2017 after serving 14 years. And apparently Mr. Mason's story was well known enough that it was covered on episodes of Cold Case Files, Forensic Files, 48 Hours Mystery, and Murder Book. Some of my favorite shows, except for Murder Book. I've never heard of that one before, but I watch the other ones on a regular basis. All right, next is one that we all know very well, the Golden State Killer, which was once again solved using DNA, using genetic genealogy. It took 47 years, and that was, they're estimating that from the date of the earliest crime. Happened in various cities throughout California. The crimes happened between May of 1973 through 1986, and the conviction date, June 29th, 2020. So just about 3 years ago. All told, there were 13 homicides, 50 SAs, and 100 burglaries. So Mr. Joseph James D'Angelo was very busy. All right, so the Golden State Killer case is probably the most notorious cold case on this list. Definitely. Between 1973 and 1986, countless burglaries, homicides, and SAs were committed by the, let's see if I pronounce this right, Visalia Ransacker, the East Area I don't think YouTube likes the R word. The East Area Assault. You get the picture. And the Night Stalker, which is later renamed the original Night Stalker, when Richard Ramirez was also given this nickname. It wasn't until decades later, in the early 2000s, that investigators started to suspect that the original Night Stalker and the East Area were the same person. And eventually the suspect was dubbed the Golden State Killer by crime writer Michelle McNamara in 2013. During the decades-long investigation, several suspects were cleared through DNA evidence, alibi, or other methods. Then, in 2018, authorities charged then 72-year-old Joseph James D'Angelo with 8 counts of first-degree based upon DNA evidence. Recently, in June 29, 2020, D'Angelo pleaded guilty to multiple counts of homicide and kidnapping, as well as crimes that he had not been formally charged with. And this is why investigators now know that D'Angelo was also the Visalia ransacker. And I'm assuming that the Visalia ransacker was the name they gave him for the burglaries, but I'm just assuming that. Another bit of trivia: during the early years that the Golden State Killer's crimes were committed, Joseph D'Angelo was a police officer with a burglary unit. But he was fired in 1979 after he was arrested for shoplifting. Go figure. So maybe the reason he decided to commit some of these burglaries was because he was an officer, worked in the burglary unit, and maybe thought he knew how to get away with it. Evidently, he was wrong. All right, number 5, the homicide of Wendy Joe Allison. And it took 48 years, 10 months, and 27 days to be solved. The crimes happened in Los Angeles, California, on September 30th, 1968, and Edwin Dean Richardson, who died in 2013, was convicted on August 26, 2017. All right. Wendy Joe Allison's homicide went unsolved for 48 years. Excuse me. Before DNA evidence revealed that her killer was Edwin Dean Richardson. While Allison's family now knows who killed their sister, unfortunately, Richardson died in 2013 while in prison. He was incarcerated in Ohio for a different homicide he committed in 1972. Investigators said that witnesses said that Richardson had been in the area that Allison was last seen in back in 1968. He also matched the description of a man who witnesses saw in the store at the same time Allison was there. After combing through Richardson's history, investigators concluded that he was definitely Allison's killer. And more trivia. Investigators have revealed that Edwin Dean Richardson is a suspect in 4 additional cold cases from decades ago in the Los Angeles area. So I'm going to have to research that and see what other homicides or cold cases that he is suspected in. So I'll have to write that down, put that in my mental sticky notes. All right, number 4. The homicide of Susan Galvin in Seattle, Washington, in July 1967, and they named the suspect Frank Wypack, who died in 1987, in May of 2019. And he, like I said, Mr. Wypack died in 1987 before the case was solved. So we will see how they solved it. All right, Susan Galvin's homicide is another cold case that was recently solved through running old DNA through modern genealogical databases. So this is happening a lot lately. They're using this genetic genealogy to solve these cases, and I think it's still kind of controversial. A lot of people say it's an invasion of privacy, because these are public databases. You can submit your DNA to these public databases, find out, your family lineage, like, what part of the world you might have come from, or your ancestors may have come from, and things of that nature. So a lot of people, like I said, they think it's an invasion of privacy. But in my opinion, if this kind of technology and the use of these public databases can be used to either identify a victim, to bring some closure to their family, I'm all for it. And I will say that if it helps to catch an offender, I'm all for that too. Now, that's just my opinion. Um, but if the technology is there, in my opinion, I think it should be used. Because from what I understand, they take the DNA, put it in this, public database. Then they have specialists to do research to narrow down any family members, any part of the country, to find out who this person could be related to. Now, as far as I know, I could be wrong, and please let me know in the comments if I'm wrong. They can't just say, okay, put it in there and they find the brother of somebody that had put their DNA into the database. They can't just go arrest this person just because their DNA matched. They, of course, have to investigate, get a search warrant, or somehow get the person's actual DNA from the actual person, if that makes sense. And then, like I said, continue their investigation. Anyway, as I understand it, that's the way it works. I don't know. Like I said, let me know. Let's see. Galvin was found essayed and killed in a parking garage in July 1967, and there was only ever one suspect. It says a professional clown, which brings back vibes, John Wayne Gacy vibes, who had been seen with Galvin a few days before she was found, was the only suspect for several decades. The clown was never charged because of a lack of evidence, and in 2016, the clown was finally cleared through a DNA test. During the summer of 2019, investigators submitted the offender's DNA that they had collected decades before to Parabon Nanolabs in Reston, Virginia. By using information in a genealogical database, a family tree was created for the offender, and he was eventually identified as Frank Wypick. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Galvin's case has been solved, and there will never really be true justice for her killing, as Wypick died in 1987. And this is interesting. Investigators said that they are now looking into whether or not Frank Wypick, who was in the Army, may have killed anyone else while he was stationed in New York, Alaska, and Germany. So, hopefully, if he did commit any more killings, that they'll be able to find that information out. All right, we're almost done. Hang in there. Number 3, the killing of Everett Delano in Andover, New Hampshire. And now this one, 52 years, 5 months, and 19 days. That is a long time. That's about as long as I have been alive. I'm giving away my age here, but oh well. The crime happened on September 1st, 1966, and the case was officially closed on February 20th, 2019. The suspect, Thomas Cass, died in 2014 before conviction. So we have another one that passed away before he was convicted, which not unusual. Like I said, 52 years. Not surprising that a lot of these offenders have passed away before they were convicted. Oh my goodness, it is hot in here tonight. I'm about to die. Anyway, but when it's 106 during the day here with the heat index of 117, what can you expect? Anyway, back to the case. So, although there was never a conviction in the killing of Everett Delano, the case was officially solved and closed in February of 2019. Delano, who was a Navy veteran, was shot 3 times while working for a friend in Sanborn's garage in 1966. While he initially survived, Delano passed away the following day in the hospital. Law enforcement did recover fingerprints from the scene, but never found a suspect or weapon until the case was reopened in 2013. The fingerprints collected all those years ago belonged to career criminal Thomas Cass. So investigators interviewed Cass 3 times before Cass took his own life in early 2014. Coward's way out, in my opinion. The woman who lived with Cass at the time of his death said that Cass told her, "You never talk about something that has no statute of limitations." So we all know the M offense has no statute, no limitations. So based on this confession, the fingerprints, and Cass's taking of his own life, investigators deemed that Cass was the offender. A little bit of trivia. It took several years for Delano's case to be officially closed after Cass, after he took his own life, because the prosecutor's office had been short-staffed, which unfortunately that's the case nowadays too. It's police are short-staffed, and it's just an unfortunate. Good Lord, my hair is all. Anyway, lost my train of thought. Unfortunately, a lot of police departments are short-staffed, and it just takes time to solve a lot of these cases. All right, we're almost done. Number 2, the homicide of Margaret Peggy Beck from Jefferson County, Colorado. Excuse me. Now, this case, 56 years, 8 months, and 5 days. The day of the crime, August 18th, 1963, and the suspect, James Raymond Taylor, was identified April 23rd, 2020. And it says he is not yet convicted. I don't know how old this article is. So he may still be out there running around, but we will read and see. All right. Had my tablets being slow. All right. The cold case over the homicide of Margaret Peggy Beck in Colorado was recently solved through, once again, genealogical testing. In late April 2020, law enforcement in Jefferson County announced that they knew who SA'd and killed Beck back in 1963. But unfortunately, they cannot locate the suspect, James Raymond Taylor, and they don't even know if he's still alive. So, I would never wish death upon anybody, but if Mr. Taylor did this, and he could have committed more crimes, maybe it would be, this is just my opinion, maybe it would be better if he is not with us. Taylor's family have cooperated with law enforcement, but say that they haven't seen Taylor since the 1970s. So that's about 50-something years that they say they haven't seen him. His last known address was in Las Vegas in 1976. And the search for Taylor is ongoing, and Beck's 3 living sisters hope for justice. Absolutely. The family, these 3 sisters, the rest of the family absolutely deserve justice, as do all family members and friends of victims. Investigators were able to identify James Raymond Taylor after a comprehensive DNA profile, which was created from Margaret Beck's fingernail scrapings from 1963, was run through a genealogical research database. And it's funny. Well, not funny, but I was talking to my mom earlier, and we were just talking about, the true crime and the cases in the news. And I told her, if, God forbid, this would never happen, if I was ever attacked and somebody tried to kidnap me, I might not survive, but they would know that they'd been in a fight, and I would scratch and claw for all I had in me, and the evidence, under the fingernails. If I was in a vehicle or a building, I'd be sure to touch as much stuff as I could to get fingerprints, DNA. Hopefully that'll never happen. I like to think that being so interested in true crime that I've maybe learned a little bit about how not to become a victim. But anyway, I thought that was interesting that me and my mom were talking about that very thing about the fingernail scrapings earlier. All right, so we are to number 1. The homicide of Irene Garza in McAllen, Texas. 57 years, 7 months, and 22 days. The crime was committed on April 16th, 1960, and was solved December 8th, 2017. The suspect is Father John Bernard Feet. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. It's F-E-I-T, Feet or Fight. So we will look at Miss Irene Garza's story. Goodness. Okay. The homicide of Beauty Queen, and you see that picture there's beautiful, beautiful girl, remained a mystery for 57 years until Father John Bernard Fight, I'm going to go with Fight, was convicted in 2017. This makes Irene Garza's homicide the oldest case ever solved. Now, I found a couple of articles about old cases that were solved, so there's some discrepancy about what was actually the oldest case. I can't remember the other one that was mentioned, but I think they didn't count that one because the person who was convicted of it was later exonerated or something, so they didn't count it as being solved. All right. Irene was last seen alive on April 16th, 1960, and was reported missing the following morning after she failed to return home after going to confession at church. A large volunteer search was immediately launched, and Irene's body was found a few days later on April 21st. Father John Bernard Fight was the priest who heard Irene's confession. Scary, scary. And was the only identified suspect in her death. However, there was never enough evidence to convict Father Fight, and the case went unsolved for decades. In 2002, 2 clergymen, Dale Tickeny and Joseph O'Brien, said that Fight had confessed to killing a woman back in the 1960s. So this was, instead of this time DNA being used, it was a confession. Despite the new information, it still took over a decade for Irene's case to be reopened, and Fight was not convicted until 2017. And Father Fight recently died of natural causes on February 12th, 2020, while being incarcerated. All right, so there are the top 10 oldest cases ever solved. I thought that was very interesting. I said when I was reading, when you got up to the 40 and the 50 and almost 60 years to be solved, that just blew my mind. But like I said, it's a good thing that the technology is being advanced enough where we can use DNA to start solving a lot of these old cases. On the news here in Arkansas, last week, they reported that I'm assuming, I think it was the FBI brought in one of the MVAC machines, and that 3 or 4 of the local agencies here in Arkansas used it to test for DNA on some cold cases. And I know they're not going to release any of the information, but I'm just dying to know which cases that they use this MVAC machine to test. So hopefully, sometime in the near future, something will come of it, and we will get to hear about it. And if we do, I will definitely let you guys know. All right, it is so late right now. I've been on here 45 minutes. I have been talking. You're probably sick of hearing me talk. So I will say, I hope you enjoyed this. Thank you very much for watching. Please leave a thumbs up if you liked it. Leave comments. I'd love to know your thoughts on any of these cases. Share the video. If you know anybody who would think that would be interesting, share it with them. Before you leave, please consider subscribing if you like what we do here. Like I said, we feature missing persons and unsolved cold cases. That's the most important. Sorry, I had to move my tablet. I got distracted as usual. The most important thing I want to do here on my little baby channel is keep the word out there and the names out there if are missing, and hopefully try to find them, bring some closure to their families, just keep their name out there so that they are never forgotten. That is my mantra, never forget. So anyway, until next time, have a great rest of your weekend. Take care of yourselves, stay safe out there, take care of each other. That's the most important thing we can do, is take care of each other. And I will see you next time. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.